Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel on solidarity. My name is Jules Mallis, and my pronouns are they, them. I am here to provide some introduction and framing before we get into the conversation. So for those who don't already know, I'm the executive director at Repair the World Pittsburgh, and it's my honor to introduce today's panel on solidarity. So first, I'll begin with some digital housekeeping and then framing around today's conversation. First, we are awaiting our ASL interpreter who will be pinned to the screen, and they will be joining us shortly. And we also have automated closed captionings as well. Additionally, we are recording the panelists and moderators and ASL interpreter, but not anyone else who's participating as an attendee here. We have Jess Gold on tech support, so please message Jess for any tech needs. If you're not sure how to use a function, you're having any challenges, please message Jess Gold. And we also have Emma Duhamel on the call, who is checking folks in who registered, so please message them as well to share any details as needed. And now onto our conversation at hand. Repair the World Pittsburgh is nearly 10 years old, coming up this August 2023. We are a nonprofit organization grounded in Jewish values and connected to 12 other US cities doing similar work. We seek to build meaningful partnerships and relationships to support meeting the emergent needs that our communities face, especially regarding food access, education justice, transportation, housing, environmental justice, and all of the ways those issue areas intersect, especially with racial justice and other pressing ways that our community is navigating the world. So our main avenue to do this type of work is through service, which is connecting volunteers with meaningful opportunities to engage in one-time and consistent service. And as well to engage in contextual issue-based learning and connect it back to Jewish values. So on the topic of Jewish values, one of the values that we hold core to our work at Repair the World and beyond is the value of achdut, which also translates as solidarity, the reason why we are here today. Today's conversation explores what solidarity looks like today. The conversation is a culmination in many ways of over 3 years of digital community conversations that we have been co-hosting and participating in on Zoom throughout the pandemic related to community solidarity. Some of those panels you may have been at, just to jog your memory. We had a panel around where do we go from here, about how to support each other in the face of anti-Semitism, racism, gun violence, and more. We had a panel on police violence and how we can create change. We had a panel on Black and Jewish histories of the Hill District, and a very highly watched Standing in Solidarity panel nearly 3 years ago, hosted by Ben Arc Pittsburgh. Many of the virtual panels have been in direct partnership with some of today's panelists and organizations, with a special shout out to One Hood and World Affairs Council, whom we co-produced a series together. Okay, today is Thursday, May 18th, 2023. We are sitting at the beginning of an emerging world where the public health emergency of COVID-19 has just been declared ended, despite ongoing viral transmissions, deaths, and lack of access due to concerns around health and safety, especially for those who are high risk, immunocompromised, and otherwise affected and disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 risks due to race, socioeconomic status, nationality, and much more. Otherwise, we know that the lifting of the public health emergency, Title 42, will also greatly impact folks at the border seeking refuge, safety, and understanding as Title 8 has been reinstated. Today, I am actually calling in from Florida, where the governor just signed a bill banning DEI initiatives in public colleges, as well as 4 anti-LGBTQ+ bills into law with severe penalties, including gender-affirming care ban, bathroom ban, restrictions on drag shows, and the expansion of Don't Say Gay, amongst other bills. I know earlier today when I used the men's bathroom and some folks came in, I was very anxious about the situation I found myself in. Today is also Haitian Flag Day, which commemorates the country's independence from the French and represents Haitian liberation from their oppressors. And as the Haitian Heritage Museum here in Florida says, Haiti was the first independent nation in Latin America and the first post-colonial independent Black-led nation in the world, and the only nation whose independence was gained as part of a successful slave rebellion. And lastly, I bring us back to Pittsburgh. We just had our local primaries on Tuesday. Our water utility company is proposing a stark increase in costs. And as many folks know, the 2018 synagogue shooting trial has only just begun downtown and will continue on for months. While many of our intersecting communities are facing white supremacist violence, whether it be interpersonal, seen through vigilante violence, and more institutional, ideological, or internalized, we are here to address how can we show up for each other, ourselves, how do we keep each other safe, and address the unique nuances that our communities navigate. So on that note, I am excited to pass the floor to our panelists to introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hi, I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Miracle Jones. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at One Hood Media. I want to thank Repair the World for hosting this wonderful talk, and I'm very excited to engage this conversation with my fellow panelists. Solidarity work is something that is integral to all of the work that we do, and to have the liberation that we are, fighting for. One Hood Media is a social justice arts organization whose mission is to build liberated communities, and that is only possible if we are working together and working with other organizations and community stakeholders. So again, thank you so much for having me.
I don't know if we have an order, but I'm happy to go next. My name's Maggie Feinstein, and I'm the director of the 1027 Healing Partnership here in Pittsburgh. We're an organization that was started after the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue with the intention of being able to help build community resiliency in the face of a communal trauma. We have been in operation for about 4 years, and through that have seen really the partnership piece of where Pittsburgh pulls together in a moment of really dark history in the city, the ways in which lots of organizations, but also lots of individuals and lots of faith leaders found solidarity as the answer to the act. So I look forward to this, and thank you, and I'm honored to be here.
Hi, my name is Monica Ruiz. I'm the executive director of Casa San Jose, a nonprofit organization here in Pittsburgh. We service immigrants and refugees, primarily recent arrivals from Mexico, Central and South America. And we have several satellite offices. We serve the region. And I'm really glad to see the growth of Latinos here. It's something that hasn't happened for a while, and now it's happening at a fairly high rate. And I couldn't be happier. And I'm really, really glad to be a part of this conversation. I have worked with most of these people for quite some time, and in really deep connected work and meaningful work. And I'm just really happy to be here and have this conversation. Thank you.
Hey everybody, I'm Jonathan Mayo from Bend the Arc Jewish Action Pittsburgh. Part of a national organization. Bend the Arc is a community organizing group with chapters around the country. Bend the Arc Pittsburgh has been around, kind of came up on the heels of the 2016 election, and we have been engaging, kind of like what Monica said, with pretty much everyone who's a part of this today since that time. And we've managed to show up for each other in a variety of ways, from traumatic things to celebrations. And I think that's a lot of what solidarity is about, which is what we'll get into. Currently, Bend the Arc Pittsburgh is doing a lot of work at the table around conditions at the Allegheny County Jail. We've also been very active electorally. And in fact, that work at Allegheny County Jail led us to make our first ever local level endorsement. Bend the Arc National had never done that. And we did that in endorsing the person who is now the Democratic nominee for county executive. And I'm honored to be on this screen with all these wonderful people.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. We also have an amazing moderator, DS Kinsel, who will be joining us after helping out his baby who needed something. And as babies do, they are our most important priority. So we will welcome Daryl when he gets here. So just to get us started here, the first question we want to ask, and also to give a quick overview, we will be having a conversation till about 7, and then we will be opening it up to audience questions. And there should be a chat function for you to be able to submit your questions. So definitely write down some ideas you might have. So first, to get us started, solidarity is an action of care, and it can often be an action of sacrifice. So we would like to hear from the panelists if you're able to name a moment where you operated in solidarity, or if you would prefer to share about a person you have witnessed showcasing solidarity in courageous ways.
I'm happy to go first and just sort of share a little bit. I've spent the last 3 weeks as we prepare for this trial watching jury selection for a capital case at the federal courthouse. And I would say that in terms of acts of solidarity and the ways people show up, it's really remarkable to me to see people from multiple counties around the area who are showing up for their jury selection. And I've seen people who open their hearts to vulnerability, to thinking deeply about critical issues, and wondering what it would feel like from other people's positions. And so I say that for a lot of them, they had never pictured themselves as related to this event. And I've seen people saying, you know, I've thought about this every day. I really have found myself thinking deeply about this. And it shocks me how courageous it really is to allow yourself to imagine being in somebody else's shoes. And so that's an act of solidarity that has been very present for me right now, and is sort of an unconventional space that I have been witnessing.
I'll jump in, and I like how that was framed in terms of how other people show up for us. In the wake of that shooting, Bend the Arc, Pittsburgh organized a very large protest march. And we had already been in relationship with, you know, a lot of organizations and communities. And, you know, I'm thinking specifically when we were trying to figure out how did we want to frame this, because we've always wanted to make sure people understood that this was larger than just an attack on the Jewish community, without discounting that in any way, shape, or form. And so when we reached out to those people we were in relationship, one of those people was Monica Ruiz, who we asked to speak at that march, because as I'm sure we'll get into, these issues of white supremacy impact all of us and not just one of our communities. And Monica, as she always does, said yes instantaneously. And, you know, the impact I thought her words had to sort of tie our communities together, and how important it is that we continue to work together to fight against these kinds of hateful acts and rhetoric, was key to the points that we were trying to make.
I think an example that comes to mind is that there are times when we don't know how to show up, but we do anyway. And it's just being there and being available. And I've said it many, many times of specifically the folks over at Bend the Arc, when we first started organizing, we had a campaign to try to save one of our community members from being deported. And it wasn't so much of, hey, you know, we're here, what can we do to help? Let us know if you need something. It was really like, no, we're here. We're here. We're here. What can we give us things to do now, without knowing what the next step was, but just knowing that you have the support of people that understand and, you know, are just offering what they can at the moment when you need it the most.
Yeah, I think that's something that's very important to understand. What solidarity is, a lot of times you don't know how to show up, right? It's just trying to do what you can with the resources that you have. And I'm reminded, Julie, when Jules, when you were talking about what's going on in Florida, we do a lot of organizing at my job. And one day a person reached out and said, I'm not coming to this event because there are no trans people at this event. One Hood, we're a Muslim-based organization. And I expressed that to my boss, and my boss was like, okay, let me know who in the community would feel comfortable coming. Let me know their contact information, and sent that to the organizers, and was like, we need to have a more reflective organizing and outreach. And that one email, right, is one of the reasons why a lot of people just felt comfortable working with our organization. And we have been very fortunate to do a lot of unlearning and engaging, like both publicly and privately, with communities because of that. But it's very important to understand that we don't have all the answers. We're human, we make mistakes, but we see the humanity in each other. And like Jonathan was saying, that we understand that white supremacy impacts us differently, but we're still all impacted. And because of that, we all have to work together and come together and engage with each other. But that doesn't mean we're always going to get along, and doesn't mean we're not going to have disagreements, but it means that we see past that, and we are committed to building a world where we're all safe and we're all together and we're all thriving.
Thank you all for sharing that. On that note, I want to ask, how do we operate in solidarity in moments of joy? And how is that different from showing up in moments of pain?
I'll start. I think in moments of joy, we operate, it's like us coming together for food, for like community, and we're like relaxing and we're getting to know each other, and we're just like existing. And it's just to have fun, to enjoy our city, to enjoy our neighborhood. But in moments of pain and crisis, we're there for a very specific reason, right? We are moving with a sense of urgency. We're moving with a need and desire to protect one another. So whether it's a situation where we're searching for a lost one, whether it's we're physically putting our bodies on the line to protect other folks, whether we're activating a crisis call because we saw ICE somewhere in the jail or somewhere at the courthouse, it's the same work of showing up, but the urgency makes it different, and the trauma and the pain that comes with showing up for someone in crisis is totally different than when you're just going to a cookout, or when you're watching a movie, or when you're having like a dance.
Can we plan the Repair the World Solidarity Dance now while we're doing this panel? Because I'm all in. I think we've probably spent too much time, unfortunately out of necessity, coming together in times of trauma and pain. And I think this question reminds me anyway that we need to find more ways to come together in times of joy, because I don't think you can have one without the other. I think that, yes, we need to continue to show up for each other in those difficult times. And I'm confident we will, but if we don't really know each other in those times of joy, then it becomes only about the pain or the protest or, putting yourself on the line, Miracle, as you put it. And I think, we need to break bread with each other. We need to find those ways to learn about each other in a more holistic and complete way. And I think back to several years ago doing a solidarity Seder with One Hood. And that's kind of where our relationship as organizations started. And that was a time of joy where we learned about each other's customs. And obviously we talked about, our pasts as peoples, as communities and things like that. That goes without saying. But I would like to find more ways to emphasize the joys in our life.
Yeah, and I think sort of building on what Jonathan and Miracle were saying, I think a lot about what are the drivers of our behavior, right? Like, so what is it that makes us move in any way, anytime, whenever we choose to move? And that sometimes the call when there's pain is actually easier to move towards than the call when there's joy. And to Jonathan's point, I think, what does it look like to both be invited into spaces of joy for solidarity, but also to be driven to show up, because I think a lot of the time we can feel that call, needing bodies to show up sometimes when there's pain. And I'm going to, in Jewish tradition, we have a Shiva after a death, and I have a Shiva to go to tonight. And so that's a very clear call. You show up when there's pain, and you show up to make sure that people who are grieving aren't alone. But the opposite of when somebody invites you, maybe somebody you don't know that well, or somebody who you don't have as much in common, what does it look like to show up for the birthday party or to make an opportunity for breaking bread, to your point that, and I think that, I think a lot about with solidarity, what are our drivers for action? And, how well do we know them? How well do we know them if we're the inviter, if bringing somebody in for solidarity, or somebody has reached out to us and given us an olive branch, and do we know what kind of drives us there? And I think of the joy driver often being wanting relationships, wanting to have new relationships. And I think that's been threatened somewhat by COVID. I think a lot of people learned how to hunker down. And so I think it's a good reminder of solidarity and joy being, this is a time where we may have to push ourselves. We may have to give a little bit more effort of driving that behavior to find ways to show up in joy, because I think we maybe got out of practice to some degree in the time where we had to close our worlds down a little bit.
I mean, I think that everything was so well put, but I think the only thing I can add is just understanding, when we show up for each other during pain, which usually it happens that way before you can show up for each other in joy, it's like a different version of the person. It's a different piece of their life. And to see sometimes people, at different points in their lives where they are in pain or they are in need, and then being able to spend time with them in a different light is beautiful. And it has, I've walked into places where I've seen folks, and, sometimes I walk into a function or something, and then there's always that nervousness, but then I look and I see Jonathan, I'm like, okay, this is somebody who I know and I trust and who knows me in all these different spaces. And it's okay. It's okay, or with Miracle, the other day I looked over and I saw her and I was like, it brings you down, because that people see you differently and they know you in all your different aspects, and it's just beautiful. And you're right, Jonathan, we need to do it more often.
Thank you all for reflecting on how to show up in moments of joy as well as moments of pain. And to get to some of the core of this question of solidarity, why we're here as a group of folks who have intersecting identities that are impacted by white supremacy, I wanted to ask the question, in what ways can anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness prevent solidarity across community.
I'll start. To have this conversation yesterday. I think that sometimes when you are under attack by a force, you turn inward, right? You pick and choose who is your family and who is your friends, because you don't want to have to go through the questions of, can I trust this person? Will this person have my back? Does this person see my humanity? And what that ends up looking like as far as communities is we sometimes will default to anti-Blackness, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, homophobia to justify not building bridges and not expanding our support. And then we look at things through a racial or colorized lens when we are under attack. And then we allow white supremacy sometimes to divide our communities and to prevent us from seeing the humanity, in each other. We were having a conversation and someone said, to me, the face of anti-Semitism is Kanye West and Kyrie Irving, right? And so for that, as a Black person, you're like, oh my God, right? And you have to process, do I support these people because they're Black? Do I take a second and say, wait a minute, we need to have a conversation and to engage and educate? Or do I understand like the hurt and pain and trauma and fear that this person is expressing to me, right? And so in times of situations like that, we see how community, how education, how culture can work together to educate us and bring us together. But we also see how some people will just like, I can't have this conversation. I have to protect my community. And so therefore, I want to say all Black people are like that. And I'm just going to move away from Black issues. And it's a real conversation, and it's the reality that we live in, right? We only have 24 hours in a day. And for some of us, if we have to spend 5 hours trying to figure out if somebody said something because of bigotry, somebody said something because they just don't know, somebody said something just because they're trying to be a troll and get social media. For some people, that is just too much time to waste. And so we end up making really rash and snap judgment. Sometimes it's for our own safety. But for me, I think it's because white supremacy is so violent and so unpredictable that sometimes we always don't have the patience and grace to really figure out where things are coming from.
Wow. Thank you for that, Miracle. I think, this is where the showing up sort of fights against this, but these forces, these violent forces, as Miracle said, they thrive on either creating their own wedges between communities or forcing us to put up some of those walls that I think you were alluding to. And I think when we are in solidarity, when we are in relationship with each other, we can reach across those community lines to try to help keep those walls from being built, whether we build them ourselves or whether they are built for us. And more often than not, I think they're built for us. And those that want to see us destroyed, and I'm using us in a very wide sense right now, will use anything to keep us apart from each other. It's an overused axiom that there's much more that keeps us together than should keep us apart as communities. But as targets of all these forces, they are very, very good at keeping us apart.
Yes to what both of you just said. And I think, I'm going to go the understanding the hurt and pain and trauma, the idea that ultimately talking about how these different ways of identity-based violence or bigotry or different areas where people are harmed, that what that often causes, and especially the longer it lasts, and what Miracle is describing, I think of a little bit as tribalism, right? And this idea that necessarily we hunker down to our tribe for safety. And that's like a very biological, natural, common response if you're feeling under attack. And I think ultimately part of the question is how to not feel under attack is challenging, right? That I'm come from a little bit more of the mental health side, and we often talk about perception and perception and reality. And so you have to keep yourself safe. And so in reality, you do need a tribe to keep yourself safe sometimes. The perception that who's against you and who's with you can often be the most damaging, I think. And I think Jonathan's 100% right that that it benefits, unfortunately, some level of an oppressor to have people feel that way. That it ultimately, if smaller groups get subdivided, then a bigger group gets more power, say. And so I think, you know, I really appreciate, and I think Miracle might have been the one to say this when we had a preliminary conversation, but I've been chewing on it for a little while, is that ultimately also once we get into tribalism, the feeling of solidarity gets spread out. And what do we often think about, like the idea that there's scarcity mindset that can be how we approach it. And I've been thinking about that. And I think Miracle, was I correct in attributing that to you? But I remember then walking away and thinking about all the things that actually there's not a scarcity of, but we feel like there are scarcities of, that we have to be cautious on how we spread it too thin. And I just think that it really comes up in this area specifically because there's sort of an idea sometimes of comparing pain. Oh, you know, well, whatever, that tribe is not feeling what my tribe's feeling, and we have it worse. And what happens is that the idea that, well, that means solidarity should only go to one space, or is there enough? Is there enough solidarity that we actually don't have a scarcity and we don't have to use any of that to kind of divide us further, but rather to find ways to come closer together. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, and I appreciate the wisdom you all shared.
Yeah, my mind is going like 10 different, it's like jotted down a couple of things, but I think Miracle's the one who said it. It's about having tough conversations. We have to recognize this. We have to call it out. It happens in our communities. It happens even within the Latino community. And so, you know, we can't tolerate it. And by not talking about it, we're tolerating it. And so having these tough conversations, I think, is really important. And it is my responsibility to do that, and it is your responsibility to do that. Once we take that stance, you know, just thinking, oh, you know what, that's not really my problem. Let my neighbor take care. No, it is your problem, because this is how we got here today, because nobody is saying it's their problem, and we're continuously being divided. And so I think that's the only thing, and it's dangerous. It's very dangerous if we don't take these steps. People will lose their lives. People have lost their lives because of this, and will continue to if we don't take responsibility for it.
Yeah, this conversation, we had a preliminary talk, and so Maggie was referencing some of that conversation we had initially, and I believe Miracle had brought this really great idea to the forefront, and by great ideas, the way you said it was great. Something about just because you are oppressed doesn't mean you cannot oppress others. And I wanted to bring to the conversation this idea of, you know, we were talking about how we're all impacted by white supremacy, and how our communities might get pitted against each other or subdivided instead of showing up for each other. And this idea of solidarity with whiteness and like connection to whiteness that different communities may express, whether on an individual or collective level, and how that can impact the way they are treated and or treat others. So there's this conversation around, what is, you know, whether or not you are white identifying, white passing, et cetera, but how does your sort of solidarity to the whiteness and white supremacy, interact in your life? And so the next question goes a little deeper around these topics, and you can interpret however you wish. So what is a threat, and how do we communicate that across communities?
It's a broad question. I'm tap dancing while my brain is spinning, but I want, if I can sort of take what you said, Jules, before you asked the question about some of the things, that we hadn't talked about in our preliminary conversation, because I do think, I think there are the obvious threats, the threats of violence, people who want to wipe us from existence. And then I think there are ones that are a little more abstract, and going back to the point that been brought up, I think a threat is not being willing to have those difficult conversations, right? Without tension, there's no growth. And I think we could, even if your intention is not to turn inward and be insular because we have to protect our own, which I think all of our communities have experienced that need to do that. But even if your intentions are not to do that, there's also that sort of kind of shouting from afar kind of mentality where, like, well, I don't think that's right, but I'm not going to get out of my own insular bubble to do anything about it. And I think we need to have those difficult conversations, right? People in the Jewish community and people in the Black community need to talk about Kanye and Kyrie Irving and why they're the examples, right? And I think I brought this up in the preliminary conversation. It was brought to my attention recently by someone in the Black community. I'm painting with a broad brush here, but that there are people in the Black community who do not differentiate between Jews and white people. While there are obviously Jews of color, but there are white presenting Jews who don't recognize there are Jews of color who are very much a part of the Jewish community or don't feel like they're a part of the Jewish community. These are all really complicated things that we're not gonna solve in the next 20 minutes, but these are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about within our own communities and also across communities. Otherwise, the abstract threats will turn into the very real threats that each of our communities have experienced.
I agree that the question's hard because threat is a word. I mean, ultimately, to me, the challenge of the question is threat and how we look at it. But I think Jonathan, talking about the threat that in a lot of ways, apathy or indifference is probably a threat to all of us. Because what is happening, especially now, is the rapid growth of ideas and language that is really damaging and leads to violence. So as soon as we feel indifferent or turn away, and then I use apathy also because I think I generally believe that compassion and curiosity fixes almost everything, and the opposite would be apathy, right? And sort of prejudging, and that in my mind that our biggest threat is when we no longer feel curiosity and compassion, because it's really hard to get anywhere else.
I would just say that, a threat is also what I'm thinking of is like a lack of understanding. And so that's how we can pit, people against each other when we don't have a clear understanding of why we're being pitted against each other, and why, just because it's been that way since, the time that you've known, it really isn't that way. And I think about some of the work that we're doing at Casa, and we've been working with an organization, and on the weekends we get 20 Latino youth and 20 African-American youth together, and we're being strategic about it. And so I won't take up a lot of time, but I'm not from here, and I grew up in a really diverse community. And so when I got to Pittsburgh, I was a little in shock because of the lack of diversity. And so and there wasn't really a strong relationship specifically with the Black and Brown community. And so I feel that this would have happened organically moving forward, but I'm a little impatient sometimes and I want to wait. So I created this program. And so the youth are divided into different groups, and one is cooking. It's a culinary, there's media, there's art, and I think dance. And so we specifically showed them even like the certain foods that we eat, like the origin came from Africa, the music that we listened to, like all of these things. We wanted to make sure that the Latino youth understood that, and that the folks from the African American community saw what, the wonderful things that they have given to us that we use in different ways. And so now from those groups, we've identified some leaders, and those kids, young people, are going to be working on, the thing that they chose to work on is the mass incarceration of people of color, and what that looks like, in the Latino community, and what that looks like for our African American brothers and sisters. And so, that knowledge, I think even at that young age, is crucial. And I think that a lot of good is going to come from that, and they're going to be presenting to adults who need to hear it. And so I'm really looking forward to that.
And I would just add, I think sometimes for us, threat depends on what our response has to be and how much time we have to respond to the issue. Because, in Pittsburgh, there are real present threats. A lot of us now, since 2018, we get the alerts, right? We get, you're on this list today. It's like, oh, lovely, right? And so what our response is, especially for external threats. But I do think that miseducation, undereducation is a huge threat that a lot of us really don't perceive as a threat. And that's one of the reasons why education is so under attack right now, like all across the country, and why people are really committed to removing us from learning and from the history books and from conversations. Because a lot of this violence and pain and anger is being misdirected at people who just don't know better, or people who are able to twist history because we don't have the education to appropriately respond. And so for me, particularly the level of threat, and if it's a threat, depends on how much time I have or I'm going to be able to have to respond and to counteract it.
A lot of salient points made. Thank you all for sharing. We could take that in a lot of directions. And I want to ask you all about regarding threats. And Miracle, you brought up the alerts that we get since 2018. And a lot of us are familiar with needing some type of security, especially as communities targeted by white supremacy, which of course is a complicated challenge to have security that actually is safe for the folks that are looking for help and security. So the question is, how can we navigate security culture for our communities and other communities targeted by white supremacy?
I think we have to communicate our needs, right? I'll say, for coming from Black political organizing, to be like, I'm gonna have a conversation with the FBI is not something that is going to be like the top 5 default, right? We know the FBI is, for my community, is one of the leading threats, right? And whether it's the Black Panthers or Deacons for Defense. And so understanding that we want to be safe, but everybody's safety is going to look different, and that's okay. I think that at the very beginning, that was a challenge because not everybody knew how to communicate, like how comfortable we were to be in certain spaces. And sometimes it feels like you're doing an oppression Olympics when you're like, we're all hurt, but like, we can't do that, we can't go here, or we don't want this. And so I think with surveillance culture, it's also being able to feel safe and to say, hey, if we're going to do something like this, we need to make sure surveillance is stored in an appropriate way, that data is managed in an appropriate way. These are the past harms and hurts that my community has gone through, and these are some of the issues of concern that we have. But because we have these and connections and conversations, I think we were able to work through a lot of the pain and difference that we had like early on when a lot of these safety presentations were going on, because it was a real, it was a real challenge, and people had real emotions, and someone, was saying, you can't tell me I can't talk to law enforcement when law enforcement is the reason why I'm here today and why I'm able to have been to survive. And so we have to feel comfortable in expressing like our needs and what safety looks like and how we can and cannot operate together.
You sure, Maggie? Okay. I'm going to be brief because actually I mostly just want to take notes on that. I have really struggled with this since the 27th. And I'll say personally, like I don't currently belong to a synagogue, though I've been to many obviously since. And I do not feel comfortable seeing armed guards at the door. I just don't. And I know that there are other people in our Jewish community and other communities that makes them feel safe. So I don't know how to navigate this at all. It's been a real personal struggle for me, and I know that there isn't just one answer, right? Because as Miracle, you said, like everyone has different needs and different things that make them feel comfortable. So that's the only thing I wanted to add, that if there are people who are watching this, like who also don't know the answer, you're not alone. Even those of us who are in these activist spaces a lot, it's been one of the largest struggles since whenever I've set foot inside a Jewish institutional building.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually not going to be far off from what you're saying, Jonathan. And I think coming off what Miracle's saying, that the truth is, and again, I always lean back a little bit into mental health side of the perception, but that safety is not like, it's not a yes, no checkbox. And it's not that I think that if we are going to feel safe, we have to have complicated feelings. And what you described, Jonathan, I think is exactly that wrestling, because it's not the same for everybody. Partly because depending on my physical ability to move, I may have different needs for safety because the environment in which it is, I might have, because of the weapons people can buy, I might have different needs for safety. There's so many different reasons and sort of inputs into the question about a security culture that I feel, really strongly that we have to be creative and thoughtful. And we also have to make sure that the people who are trying to be safe, we talk about this, I think about this a lot, that there's no reason to be safe if you're not functioning, because what are you functioning for, right? So if you're safe because you're not leaving your house, have we accomplished anything? And to your point about if you go to a house of worship, which is meant to feed the hungry and clothe the, the naked, then you can't get in because there's somebody with armed security. Are we safe? And there's not a right or wrong answer, but I do think that we're safer the more we wrestle with the question, and also the more we acknowledge each other and different tolerance and comfort, and that my needs for safety may actually make someone else feel unsafe. And that the more we dialogue that, I actually think we become safer. But if we believe that because there's an armed guard that we are therefore safe, then we're lying to ourselves. But it doesn't mean that armed guard is the problem necessarily. It's just not the only answer. So I think we have to wrestle that question. And I agree with you that I think sometimes people wanted to have an easy answer.
I agree, it's a difficult question, and I appreciate what people have said. I think the only thing I would add is, the folks that we proudly serve every day, many of them are fleeing from their home countries, from people that were supposed to keep them safe. And so what does that look like here? And how can we build trust? And, to some people, it is more of a presence of a sense of security. And to some people, it's less. And so it is hard to navigate. It is.
Yeah, I just want to say it, even outside of community, like my mom is someone who's like, I feel safe when I see a police officer, right? So it's not just like communities, it's just we all have, like Maggie was saying, a different perception of safety. And that's one of the things that sometimes makes solidarity difficult, is depending on who you talk to, what the need is going to severely change, and understanding that even though we all are a part of different communities, we're not the whole entire representative of our community or the singular thought of our community. And so that's why it's very important to get out and to know the people who are in your community, in your neighborhood, so that you're better able to like show up in a more authentic way.
And I think just also bring up that the challenge of arming yourself or arming a guard or anything, right? Arms for safety. The idea of, what tools do we have to keep ourselves safe? And I think it's an important conversation in solidarity, because the question of however I choose to keep myself safe in my community may be a different way. And how often do we talk about what might be the way I would show up if I was going to be part of a joyous celebration that I was worried could be unsafe, or an act in a time of need or pain. And I wonder where we bring nuance to that conversation, so that people can know that, so that it's not transposing one person's sense of safety to another. And I think especially with Monica and what she was saying a little bit about the community specifically concerned in fleeing, and often very much, even if I was in that environment and felt unsafe, what would I do to be sensitive for the people I was showing up with?
Thank you all for sharing that. I would like to dive a little deeper into the question about how do we keep ourselves and each other safe. So what do our communities, and again, like as said, like not in a monolithic way, but just like the diversities within our community, what do our communities and the people within it need to address and discuss regarding how we support one another? While folks marinate on the answer or the question, and feel free to take it where you want to, I want to encourage our attendees to use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and please feel free to put any type of question in that function, and we will do our best to prioritize your question as well as we move through to our agenda.
I mean, I think I'll throw out there from the perspective of 1027 that there was that moment when the Islamic Center showed up, when there was still clear and present danger, specifically with the idea that solidarity, more people, more clearly, that people were going to, that our Muslim community was going to stand there to make sure safety was ensured. And thank God everything turned out okay. And Wasi is the first to sometimes say, like, that story works very well only because everything turned out okay. Don't recommend that to people necessarily. But I do think that, that example was so monumental because it was this community who came to danger with the idea that any marginalized group that's being attacked will need more people to stand with them. So I think, probably don't literally walk to the dangerous sites, but the very powerful message that came along with that, there's probably a lot more opportunities we can do that. Don't put yourself in danger necessarily for another to show solidarity when there's a security concern, and make sure that you're vocal, make sure that you are vocally present, that people know that it is not, there's more power in numbers in a lot of ways.
I'm going to just tack on very simply that we need to listen. We need to listen in a much deeper way to these communities we're striving to be in relationship with. And and find out what their needs might be. And I think, and Maggie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that, you know, what the Muslim community did was great, but then there was also some listening, because there were some, I know that there were some thoughts of sort of further help in terms of making people feel safe, but some of the congregational communities didn't exactly want some of those things. So there was listening that happened, because I think it's not the worst thing, but well-intentioned showing up without actually taking into account who you're showing up for, it defeats the purpose a little bit. And I think that the more that we can listen to each other, we can actually support one another in a much more meaningful and lasting way.
Yeah, I mean, Miracle said it earlier today, we have to be able to express our needs, you know, and then we also have to be able to listen to others people's needs. And I think that's how we're going to be able to show up better for one another. And I mean, this is a great group here, and, you know, the work that Maggie does is amazing. And so, but there are other groups that are not represented here, and how can we show up for those folks too? Yeah.
And then I would add that solidarity isn't transactional. In the sense that just because someone shows up for you doesn't mean that just because you show up for someone doesn't mean that they're going to show up for you. And to understand that you have to know why you're showing up for other people is like very important. I think also our communities have to give each other grace. Like, we're not going to solve everything, like Jonathan said earlier, in 20 minutes, but sometimes we're not going to solve everything in 3 years or 4 years, like, right? Like, there's a lot of stuff that has happened within communities and cultures, and it's going to take time. And I think a big thing is we have to give ourselves grace, because I think we are like, I get this, why doesn't everybody else get it? We get frustrated. I think also we need to figure out what second chances look like, what earning forgiveness looks like, and what taking accountability looks like. Because we've made mistakes and we're going to make mistakes in the future. But we also have to figure that out with communities. And I say that, you know, very like honestly, because if you know the history of our organization, you know, there are some people who are like, we will never work with y'all, we will never talk to y'all, just because of who you used to be associated with, and we understand that, right? And then that's also a part of like solidarity, is understanding that there are limitations. But I think that's some of the things that just like the reality of the world and the way life goes. But I would always say, show up for people as much as you can, learn and engage as much as you can, and just be the best ally. And I know Maggie said, like, you're not always going to danger, but sometimes the ultimate part of solidarity is putting yourself in danger so that other people can be protected, just, you know, for a moment. And it's also understanding what your own limitations of solidarity is going to be, so that you can be a better person and a better ally. Because I think that sometimes we have grandiose ideas of what it means to show up for someone else. And then when it gets a little rough, we don't know how to address it, because we haven't taken the time to process what it means to really be in solidarity. And so that's what I would say.
I appreciate where this conversation is going. And it's interesting to think that, you know, a lot of us here have been in conversation around these topics over the past 3 or 4 years, if not much longer. And just thinking about like where we've been and how this is like this ongoing thing that continues to evolve. And so I want to ask, does anyone here have any specific recommendations or ways that you'd like to tell people to show up in solidarity or get involved? If you want to shout out anything your organization is doing, you as an individual, I would love to just showcase or share out anything that you want to let people know is going on, that maybe they could get involved in.
Well, Casa always has things going on, and we're working on several campaigns right now. we are actively, obviously, comprehensive immigration reform is something that's at the top of our list. But also a fight for driver's licenses, tuition equity, healthcare, those types of things. People always ask, what are the specific needs of the Latino community? I'm like, well, what are your needs? The same needs, but just with the extra layers of A, B, and C. But you can go on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. There's always a call to action there. You can follow us, on our social media. But we are really, really active, and we do a lot of cool stuff with the cool people on this panel, and invite you to just show up. You just got to show up,
I mean, you can't go wrong with any of the organizations that are here. I tell Monica anytime I see her, just when I see Monica somewhere, I know I'm in the right place. So like Casa San Jose, I think the stuff that One Hood does is amazing. I think the danger is that it can seem overwhelming, right? There's so much need. There's so many things that we would like to see happen. And so it might be easy to be like, well, it's just too much. I don't know where to start. So like Monica said, just show up, pick something. I'll throw out one thing because I know that both Bend the Arc and One Hood are part of the coalition that the Alliance for Police Accountability started in and around the Allegheny County Jail. There was a fairly contentious protest and meeting of the Oversight Board today. I believe some activists may have even been arrested, or at least risked arrest today. So, and that's not me saying go out and get yourself arrested. That falls under the know your limitations of solidarity, I think. But what APA has done with that coalition, and there are more than 30 organizations as part of this coalition. So you can plug in so many different avenues to try to change things at the Allegheny County Jail, which I think is a thing that a lot of people were not super aware of if it didn't impact your community that directly. And I believe that the work that this coalition has done around those issues is a big reason why it was a priority issue during this last campaign cycle.
I'm trying to think of like the public facing things that we have going on. Because I will say that one of the things we did try to do a lot of internal programming, just to be like better rooted in community. But one of the things we have Artivist Showcase, where we've adopted 14 local artists. And if you look at our social media, we have different events with them coming up. We just did a yoga retreat for a part of that for mothers, to give them just a moment to do yoga and to relax. One of the things with solidarity, we don't charge for promo. So if you ever have any event or anything happening in the community, if you send it to us, we share it out on our social medias and a lot of times in our newsletters. We are part of a lot of like reimagining safety campaigns. And so if you have readings or literature you want to share, we're always willing to engage and learn more. But I think education is a big part. If you see a community out and about, don't make judgments. Try to learn more. Try to engage more. But I think, like Monica was saying, with the campaign, the driver's license campaign is such a big deal. We know that that possibly Texas and Florida are going to be sending migrants and refugees to Pittsburgh, as just to be horrible people, right? And so that's solidarity is going to be coming in a few weeks, because we're going to have to make sure people are housed, clothed, fed, supported. And some of the work that we're doing is also educating our community members that everyone deserves to be housed, fed, clothed, supported, so we don't have to. So we are preemptively trying to prevent disconnect that's coming, and preventing our communities from being pitted against each other. So that's some of the internal work that we are doing. But I would say we know a lot of stuff is really about to pop off this summer, and really getting plugged into Casa San Jose is going to be a big deal. I know that a couple of the criminal justice reform groups are planning on supporting 1027 once the trial starts, and making sure that people are there at the trial, supporting, being a shoulder to cry on, bringing food and different things to make sure everything is going to be okay, because unfortunately we force people to go through these horrendous trials just to get to sentencing, and it's just wholly unnecessary. But that is the way our criminal justice system operates. And so there are a lot of organizations that are getting plugged in, but I would say make sure you really reach out to 1027 and Casa San Jose, because these next couple of months are really going to be unfortunately very brutal.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't have much to add. I think people have covered, I mean, both a lot of ground, and then of course there's so much more. So I actually don't really feel like I have a ton to add to that. I think yes, and all of that. And then, you know, on a very small level, right? We are doing a solidarity campaign. We know that you know, giving any notoriety to the acts of the shooter from the Tree of Life shooting, giving any acts of notoriety means that people also will come who are in support of that ideology. And so we have a Blue Ribbons campaign that's been going on, and we'll continue it through the summer. And it's really just a way to say that we stand against this, you know, and it's the message we want to send out is, right, don't actually go fight fire with fire. We give them less attention, less energy. Don't fan those flames. And also let's remind people, really, hopefully, especially in far reaches, that with the Blue Ribbons of Solidarity, that we see, we care, we notice, and we will work together against it.
Thank you all for sharing. We are actively logging what everyone has said, so that we can send out these resources after the panel. And as we start to wrap things up, we have about 2 submitted questions I'd like to ask. And then we'll probably close out from there, unless of any big questions come through, and if we have time. So this was touched on briefly, but, you know, thinking about all the ways we can show up for each other, I'm wondering, what does accountability look like? So if you want to touch upon accountability, it's an important piece of solidarity work.
Yeah, so you know, there's a lot of times that we're asking other, like, trying to hold other people accountable, like elected officials or whoever, whatever. But we really have to do that work internally, and it's okay to not. I mean, we're all doing 20 million things, and so if you can't show up, it's okay if you can't show up, but you cannot not show up in a harmful way. It's our responsibility. And again, saying, you know, that's not my problem, that's my neighbor's problem, whatever, however folks tend to kind of categorize things that don't really affect them. It does. Everything affects us, no matter what, whether it's clean air, whether it's clean drinking, whatever it might be. And we have to show up, because not showing up got us to where we're at right now. Being laxed for, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years has got us in this situation. And we're not going to get out of it, you know, in the next 5 minutes, but we're really not going to get out of it unless we start showing up. And so challenge yourself, but make sure you're doing things correctly. You don't want to make mistakes, because when you make mistakes, it could be harmful, not only to yourself, but to the communities that you are trying to show up for. Like, it's about, like, how much change do you want? Do you really want change? You do? Okay, then do something. If you kind of don't want change, then just be quiet and stay back. But I think we're at the stage where we all want change, and we all got to get up and do something.
I would say with accountability is admitting that you messed up, and admitting that you don't know everything, and admitting that even though you are a good person, you're going to make mistakes. I think it's hard sometimes, but being open to criticism is a huge part of accountability. Trying to figure out, how you can repair harm is being accountable. And if the person you harmed doesn't want to build community with you, finding other ways to make sure you're not only stopping harm, but sharing your experiences so other people don't do the same thing. Accountability is like hard work, but like I think Mr. Jonathan was saying, you need tension sometimes to grow. And unfortunately, when we make mistakes, we have to admit that we make mistakes and grow from them and learn from them, stop doing them, but also work to make sure that other folks don't do the same mistakes as well.
Miracle, what I loved about what you just said is that it was very self-reflective. And I think a lot of people think of accountability as holding other people accountable. And I like that you turned it on yourself, more on yourself or on your own community or however you want to put it. Because I think it has to start with self-accountability. And I think holding other people accountable is tough and can be harmful. And I think conversations like this help lead to better accountability on both sides of that coin, because we know each other, and it gets back to that whole point of voicing needs and listening to needs, because then you can have a better sense of what accountability actually means. And I think that, I keep thinking of ways not to frame accountability, and maybe that's the best way to be accountable is, that there can be a tendency to think that you're not doing enough. And in being in spaces like this and in relationship with the leaders on the Zoom and elsewhere, like I've learned that sense of perfectionism is a huge tenet of white supremacy. So we're feeding right into the problem if we are holding ourselves accountable based on a definition that we are not creating ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really appreciate it. And the only thing I would kind of put back into full circle with that accountability, and it goes to what Miracle said a second ago, but and also what was said earlier about that you hold yourself accountable for your own standards, not necessarily for somebody else to give you reinforcement. And the accountability has to, come from within. And I think that's a really important component. And I think there is a little bit of a double standard in accountability. I think we hold people that we've put into positions of power accountable in a very different way than we hold neighbors or fellow community members accountable. And I think the idea that, there's a public and a private way of accountability, there's an internal private way, but there's also a private way of relationships to be able to correct wrongs within people. And sometimes people who have been put into public positions have to do that in a much more public way. But I think as community members, we can hold each other accountable and hold ourselves accountable in a much more friendly, or at least a communal way of growth.
Maggie, how you were just putting that, reminds me of the idea of how accountability can be an act of love, and that it takes a lot of care and dedication to whether hold yourself accountable or hold someone else, whether they're in your community or outside your community, someone you know or not, accountable. It's you're showing dedication, care for that person and their ability to grow, as well as for the people that person impacted. So I would like to think of it as like a really communal thing that we can share. Was there any other responses to that question before we kind of wrap up with our final submission here? Okay. So if you feel comfortable sharing, have you experienced or helped someone else experience a major shift in consciousness around solidarity? And what was that like?
I'll start. I think that, so I'll start with, I have been in Pittsburgh for 15 years. I have been at Casa for, I think, 8 of those 15 years. And our community is growing. It's still really small compared to other major cities. We're a little less than 3% of the population. And the vast majority of the people that we serve are recent arrivals. And so that being said, Latinos haven't had a presence here for a long presence for a long time. And a lot of the folks that are coming now are just, trying to survive, right? And so I think that one of the things that we've been able to do is work with our community and have them understand the significance of supporting other people's struggles. And so when, especially with the Martin campaign, they would see people that didn't look like them showing up, hundreds of people. And I think that was something that it was a good way for them to understand, like, these people are not Latinos, they're not facing deportation. None of these things are going on in their communities, but here they are showing up for us. And I'll go back to the youth. The youth have been showing up in so many different ways. They've taken on, so many of them are really, really involved in environmental justice. A lot of the young folks are doing all kinds of things. And I remember, and I can't think of her name right now. And there was a mom that was on a hunger strike because there were some questions about the death of her son at Duquesne, and I can't remember her name. But I had a group of about 8 moms that said her son died and she doesn't know how. Do you know how? Yeah, thank you. Do you know how many of our sons cross that border and we don't know how they die? We want to support her. They didn't speak English and Ms. Brown didn't speak Spanish, but it didn't matter. They were there with her. They wanted her to know that they were there for her. And I think that even something that small, it means a lot. It really means a lot, especially for people that feel like there is a lot of people showing up for them. They really want to find ways to show up for others. I'm not sure if I answered the question, but I thought that would be relevant. Sorry.
I thought you answered the question. I feel I'm going to sort of answer this just from the eye. I feel like I am shifting my consciousness around solidarity all the time. And the moment that I'm not doing that is like when I would start to worry. I think that should, for me, I want it to always be a work in progress. And it doesn't mean I'm dedicating every moment of every day, towards working in solidarity. Again, limitations. I don't know why this popped in my head, but Miracle, you were talking about like doing yoga and letting people rest, and I remember reading somewhere recently that resting is one of the largest forms of resistance that we can have to actually just stop doing things. So I think that I grew up in suburban New Jersey. I was one of 2 Jewish kids in my entire school, I think. But I grew up in suburban white New Jersey. I came to Pittsburgh 21 years ago after living in New York City for a while. From a much different lens, I also saw, Monica, what you saw in terms of, wow, this city is, my wife grew up here, so she had kind of warned me, but you don't really get it until you see it, and it wasn't until a while later that I started kind of getting more involved in this kind of work. And I feel that anytime I can have a conversation with the people in this panel, with other leaders, with other everyday folks who aren't necessarily like on the front lines all the time. Like, that's how I'm kind of shifting my consciousness around what solidarity and what showing up means.
Yeah, I'll say in one of my other duties, I do candidate moderations and forums, and I forgot what year it was. I want to say 2020 or 2021 when Danny was running for mayor. There was a lot of pushback with his campaign because when he was state representative, he had voted for a piece of legislation that made it harder for undocumented people to work. And when I had him on my podcast for Forum, I had asked him about that vote and what that meant to the community and what he would say, particularly to the Hispanic labor community as a result of that vote. And that was something that a lot of people had expressed was the first time that they had heard him be asked that question and felt like he actually understood the consequences like of his vote. And sometimes consciousness raising is something that is just by accident. It's not like you set out to change somebody's mind, but because you're tapped into other communities and you hear some of their concerns, you're able to relay those and you're able like to share and get clarification. And that was something like to me, it wasn't pre-planned, it wasn't premeditated. It was like somebody brought this to me, let me ask someone else. And so that was something that it was that even now today people will still bring that up. And I just really thought that it was just like my duty as doing my job. And so that's something I would say. And then my colleagues like to talk about how I've been able to bring queer liberation and history into a lot of the work that we do, and have made people feel like more comfortable in working with our organization. But I think a part of it was just sometimes when people see women in leadership, they feel like just more comfortable engaging and showing up and being vulnerable than they do when they see what they see as hyper masculinity. And a part of my job is that I'm able to watch as like my colleagues have the opportunities to show people that they get the issues too, and that they're like kind, considerate human beings and organizers like in their own right. And that has been like a real like true pleasure, because I think that sometimes people perceive my colleagues as being more formidable than they are when they're really just people who really care, and they're really just soft-spoken sometimes, and sometimes have social anxiety, but they're really good humans. And so that has been like a really like fun, like interesting part of like my job that I've been like very blessed to see.
Okay, before I wrap us up, were there any other responses? I don't want to cut anyone off. Okay, well, I would like to just thank everyone so much for engaging in this courageous conversation and really just being part of conversations like this over the past few years and allowing space for us to share that publicly, and for our super engaged audience who has very consistently been with us throughout the last hour and a half. I thank you. And specifically, I just want to shout out Jess, Annie, David, Repair the World, all the folks who built the foundation for this work before us, including Zach Block, the former executive director of Pitt Repair, all of the previous fellows and staff at Repair the World Pittsburgh, as well as the Fine Foundation, who has actually made some of our relevant creative solidarity work possible through some small grants. I also want to thank CJ, our ASL interpreter, Daryl and Divine, who we miss you for this hour, but we appreciate the ways that you informed this conversation right up until the moment we went live. Miracle, Maggie, Monica, Jonathan, all of the organizations you work with and the folks you work with doing this work every single day, and your families as well and friends, because we really all are part of something together. And lastly, we will be sending an accompanying packet of resources, including the links to various related panels we've done in the past, art exhibitions that also uncover a lot of this work, and some upcoming service projects. As we said, that's our lane of social change. So we will be sharing how you can get involved. Yeah, and hope you all take care and get some good rest and more thoughts to come as you think about what we spoke about today. So thanks, everyone.